Protests have rocked Tunisia over the past week. Its government is being held to account for not turning around the economy, which is on the brink of bankruptcy, with hundreds of demonstrators detained by police. This is the most severe political unrest since the country's shift to a democratic dispensation 10 years ago. I'm joined by Ebrahim Deen, Afro-Middle East Centre researcher, to chat more about this and what it means for Tunisia. Ebrahim, talk us through what is happening. I mean, these are scenes that we didn't think we would see again in Tunisia.
I think there's two things that we need to know. One is the fact that Tunisia, and has to be noted, it's 10 years, it's the most democratic Arab country, and the current president is the only one that can kind of say he's been democratically elected. I think that's significant. But the issue that fueled the revolution, which was economic unrest, that hasn't changed. In fact, things have gotten worse. The economy has become very sluggish, not helped by the coronavirus pandemic, which severely hit Tunisia's tourism sector. The fact that there is no real dominant party, so economic policies, there hasn't been any will for structural and economic reform because of the power of, because of the lack of power of political parties and the power of civil society organizations, specifically the trade union movement and the business federation. And so that's why we're now seeing these protests, that people have become fed up with the political system. And, unlike in a dictatorship, protests can happen. And, last year alone, there were 6,500 protests in Tunisia. These have just become a lot more bigger. Currently, in a sense, not necessarily calling for the regime's overthrow, but calling for more steps to be taken to spur on economic growth for jobs.
You wonder where this sort of action leads the leadership if it is so weakened. I mean, what alternative? You say there is very little alternative, but, what's the end game here?
This is the thing. The problem is, unfortunately, unless, of course, there is a will to actually implement structural reforms, and it's going to be severe structural reforms, which may actually make the situation worse for secured labor in the short term. There's just going to be more unemployment, more unrest. So, the problem is what is happening is the current party that's leading in the poll, the Free Students, is actually a Ben Ali remnant party, and so This illusion is actually leading to a nostalgia for the past, and that's the fear that, if these parties, these new parties such as UNAHDA, such as UNIDA Tunis, do not actually undertake or implement proper economic reforms, create proper jobs, we may see a return to the past. Now, I think significantly also in the Tunisia case, we need to note that, the conflicts in Libya, the leadership in transition also affected Tunisia. They are neighboring countries, and Libya, for example, is one of Tunisia's biggest trade partners.
Yeah, and how do leaders in that region, also the Gulf states, view what's happening in Tunisia? I mean, the first time this happened, many of those leaders, and then we saw it in Egypt, many of those leaders were shocked, the sort of dictators, seeing the sort of people power and the impact that people power could have on leadership.
I think significantly the difference this time is that, leaders such as the Emirates, more specifically, and Saudi Arabia to an extent, are actually pleased with the protests. Because it, in their eyes, it shows that democracy has failed, that popular rule is failing. And in actual fact, similar to what has happened in Egypt, parties such as, states such as the UAE have been accused of sponsoring, for example, the Free Student movement in Tunisia, or certain political factions, Beji Said Sebsi's Nida Tunis was also given money by the Emirates. So, the Gulf actually wants a reversal of the transition, and actually then, would likely support these protests similar to how they supported the protest in Egypt. The difference, though, is that in Tunisia, there is no real strong army. People still seem to want to have a popular say, and there's a very strong nationalist movement which would ensure that Gulf support is very minimal, not seen as very popularly.
All right, Ebrahim Deen, thanks for talking to us about what's going on in Tunisia.